It's a Supreme Court case that's largely been overlooked, but pro-lifers are beginning to sound the alarm on what USAID versus Alliance for Open Society International could mean for life-affirming policies abroad. Oral arguments for the Supreme Court case were heard in early May via teleconference. The case centers around whether or not U.S. funding of foreign groups for AIDS relief can be conditioned on their opposition to human trafficking. Though it doesn't seem obvious, pro-life leaders warn this could have major implications for pro-life policies abroad. In a recent op-ed for the Washington Times, March for Life President Jeannie Mancini writes, if the Supreme Court rules in USAID versus AOSI that First Amendment free speech rights do extend to overseas NGOs, this would threaten some of the protections in the PLGHP, or Protecting Life and Global Health Policy. Such a decision would result in making it impossible to deny pro-abortion NGOs foreign assistance without violating their free speech rights. The topic of abortion did come up during Supreme Court oral arguments when Justice Brett Kavanaugh asked the assistant to the Solicitor General if the court could affect other government policies by extending free speech protections to foreign affiliates. Take a listen to how the Department of Justice official answered.
In fact, commonplace for Congress and the executive branch to condition foreign aid to entities abroad on certain policy objectives, such as opposing terrorism or supporting women's rights or opposing apartheid, or in the case of the Mexico City policy, taking certain positions on abortion. And those content-based, viewpoint-based speech restrictions might not be permissible in the United States, and domestic entities who were able to confer or unite with their foreign bodies, with foreign entities to challenge those would, I think, create considerable risk of disturbing long-settled laws.
Catherine Glenn Foster is the president and CEO of Americans United for Life, a top pro-life legal team in the nation. She joins us via Skype. Catherine, welcome back to the show. Can you help us connect how a Supreme Court case that seems to be about AIDS relief and human trafficking actually has a connection to abortion?
Absolutely. A supermajority of Americans, we know more than 80% of Americans want to make sure that no other nation suffers from abortions paid for by American taxpayers, by you and me. America has a responsibility to be a force for good in the world, to be a moral agent. And we want to make sure that the trauma and violence of abortion has no place in our foreign policy. And that's trauma and violence that I know personally as a post-abortive woman myself.
Catherine, was there anything that stood out to you from oral arguments or from this case in particular?
Absolutely. When the Assistant Solicitor General specifically spoke to the Mexico City policy, that policy that ensures that American taxpayer dollars are not going to fund abortions overseas, he said this is an issue that could affect that as well. America is able to include our policy in our funding choices. And we do on a regular basis. We do that when it comes to drug policy and drug trafficking. We do that when it comes to terrorism, to track our funding and make sure that it is not going to fund terrorism. We do that when it comes to sex trafficking, that horrible, horrible practice. And we want to make sure that no more women and girls and men and boys and people all around the world are safe from sex trafficking in our world today. And we do that when it comes to the most absolutely fundamental human right, the right to life. We make sure that our taxpayer dollars are not going to fund abortions overseas, which the vast majority of Americans support. A supermajority, more than 80% of Americans say, absolutely not. We do not want our taxpayer dollars funding that. And that is why this case is important, to make sure that we can maintain that consistency, to make sure that we can ensure that our policy choices are being carried out in our foreign policy funding.
So to clarify, what are the significant repercussions of this case when it comes to pro-life policy? Could they be rescinded?
You know, if the Supreme Court decides against the U.S. government in this case, it does not mean that the Mexico City policy is immediately thrown out. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden American taxpayers are paying for foreign abortions. But it does mean that that door is opened. It means that there's a possibility that going forward, this law, this policy could be challenged, and that in the future, it is possible that that it could set precedent that could be used to try to strike down the life protective Mexico City policy.
You know, Catherine, there are other major pro-life cases in the Supreme Court right now. Little Sisters of the Poor, June Medical Services. But just last word, how significant do you consider this case?
This case is so significant because, of course, we have Little Sisters of the Poor, we have June Medical Services, we have these cases that could turn the abortion industry upside down. But this case is, I would say, just as important because it's about our policy choices. It's about what the U.S. can say when it comes to protecting life. Can we be that moral agent in the world? Can we be a force for good in the world? That is what we are called to. That is what we are supposed to be, what we should be. And that is what the supermajority of Americans want us to be. It's high time that the Supreme Court let us live up to that.
Catherine Glenn Foster, president of Americans United for Life, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure.